So we're working with a series of lectures that were compiled together thematically, and the Pathwork Guide covered a lot of topics. But one of the main themes is sort of the path within the path, which is the path of relationship. And that's not only individual, personal relationships like our significant others or that kind of thing, but in general, all relationships, ultimately, our brotherhood, sisterhood with all of each other, and also ultimately, I think, with all of life. But this focuses a lot on understanding where we have difficulty in relationship and where we struggle in relationship, what, might be underlying that. And so we're on, I think, chapter 5, which is a beautiful lecture called Mutuality. And it's, really helping us understand the beauty and the necessity for this kind of mutuality and depth in our relationships. So I'm going to go ahead and share the lecture now and put that up on the screen, and we'll just start. Basically, I read, and then I will pause, make comments, pause for, people to also ask questions or make comments of their own. So, Chapter 5, Mutuality, a Cosmic Principle and Law. Greetings, my friends. Blessings and love for every one of you. The topic of tonight's lecture is mutuality. I will divide the subject into 3 sections: mutuality as a cosmic principle and law, and how this law manifests in human life, and the nature and origin of the hindrances that upset the balance of mutuality. No creation can take place unless mutuality exists. Mutuality means that two apparently or superficially different entities or aspects move toward one another for the purpose of uniting and making one comprehensive whole. They open up toward one another and cooperate with and affect one another so as to create new divine manifestation. New forms of self-expression can only come into being when the self merges with something beyond itself. Mutuality is the movement that bridges the gap between duality and unity. Wherever there is separation, mutuality must come into being in order to eliminate the separation. Nothing can be created unless mutuality exists, be it a new galaxy, a work of art, or a good relationship between human beings. This applies even to the creation of the simplest object. First, the idea of the object must be formed in the mind. Without the creative inspiration and imagination by which the mind extends itself beyond its previous awareness of what already exists, not even a plan can be made. The creative aspect must then cooperate with the second aspect of mutuality, namely execution, which implies labor, effort, perseverance, and self-discipline. The first aspect, creative thinking and inspiration, can never complete creation unless the second aspect, that of execution, is brought to the task. Human beings are uncreative for 2 reasons. Either they are unwilling to adopt the necessary self-discipline to follow through on their creative ideas, or they are emotionally and spiritually contracted and can open their individual creative channels. When people begin to resolve their inner conflicts and become more healthy and balanced, they find their personal creative outlets that yield the deepest satisfaction. Mutuality as a bridge. An imbalance of the 2 aspects of creation is particularly striking in the area of human relationships. The movement that brings 2 people together in an initial attraction and love is creative, spontaneous, and effortless. And we were talking a little bit before we read the lecture on love, eros, and sex. And so, particularly sort of eros seems to, just happen involuntarily almost. And he says, yet the connection is rarely maintained. And what mostly happens is that the labor of working out the hidden inner dissensions is neglected. The childish idea prevails that the self is powerless to determine the course of the relationship. Usually the relationship is treated as if it were a separate entity that either favorably or unfavorably runs its own course. Mutuality is the bridge that leads to unification. Two expansive movements must flow out toward one another in a harmonious interplay of giving and receiving, of mutual cooperation, of positive opening. So, this mutuality is this expansion in a way, but it's an expansion of both parties. And, coming together in that, not necessarily like merging or, just, going along with one other person. It's like the mutuality is really a meeting of these two yes currents, he says. So two yes currents or manifestations of positive intent must move toward one another. The ability to accept, bear, and sustain pleasure can be learned only gradually. It is one of the most difficult goals to reach. He says in other lectures that, our fear of, pain has kind of caused us to create defenses and sort of try to numb ourselves. And that also numbs us against pleasure. And so in some ways, it's even hard for us to receive and take in good stuff, right? And sustain pleasure. And so we have to learn that gradually. And it is one of the most difficult goals to reach. This ability depends directly on a person's spiritual and emotional wholeness. Hence, mutuality depends on the entity's ability to say yes when a yes is offered. So let me pause here for a minute. Any comments or questions? So does that make sense how, he talks in other lectures about our yes and no currents, right? And there's oftentimes inner conflict and we have both currents, happening at the same time to some or varying degrees. But where we have mutuality, and eros and, relationship, it really is this movement of our inner yes towards the other person and their inner yes towards us. So how does the principle of mutuality apply to humanity's present state of development? There are three gradations. The human being who is least developed and still full of fear and misconceptions is able to expand only very little. Since expansion and mutuality are interdependent, mutuality is impossible to the degree that expansion is feared or denied, right? All human beings are afraid of opening up to some degree, as you well know. And you may not suspect that such fear exists in you, or if you do suspect it, you may explain it away. You may think that there is something wrong with you, something that no other human being shares, and therefore no one must be allowed to suspect this flaw in you. But as you go on with your inner work, you learn to fully admit, accept, and properly understand the universality of your problem, and can acknowledge your fear of opening up and expanding. You may at times be quite aware of this fear and see how you hold back your energy, your feelings, and your vital forces, because you believe yourself safer through this kind of control. To the degree that you do this, You will have problems with mutuality. People who are the least developed and the most alienated from their inner truth will not be ready for any kind of expansion and therefore for any mutuality. However, this does not mean that their longing for it is eliminated. The longing is always there. Some entities manage to squelch their longing for expansion and mutuality, perhaps through entire incarnations, without becoming aware that so much is lacking in their lives. They content themselves with the pseudo-security of separateness and aloneness. And this can be even couples, right? You know, it's like, again, in that lecture on love, eros, and sex, the guy talks about how this movement of the yes currents, this mutuality in the eros, you know, often fades. And, you know, we may, you know, stay together, but there's a sort of sense of separateness in all of that and aloneness still. And we don't have that longing, you know, for the partnership, for the mutuality, for the co-creation. And, you know, it's not easy, like he says, to arrive there. It's a very difficult journey, but that really is the most highest level of fulfillment. So, however, when development proceeds a little more, then the longing becomes stronger and more conscious, and there are many degrees and many alternatives. To oversimplify for the sake of clarity, people at the second stage are willing to open up, but are still afraid when an opportunity arises for actual mutuality. The only way the bliss and pleasure of expansion and union can be experienced for people at this stage is in fantasy, or, you know, like we have a sense of it in this stage, right? But it can't be manifested in our relationships. And there are many reasons why mutuality is not manifested in relationships. So he's offering, you know, one understanding, which has to do with, you know, our overall maturity with our emotions and our ability to feel, you know, to feel our fears, to feel our pain, to feel, you know, our true self, and not try to live in a mask. And where somebody is living in a mask, you know, and sort of going through the motions, you know, even, you know, a relationship mask, like a love mask, right, is something that is not this true mutuality that the guide is talking about, because the person is still behind their defenses, right? So, any comments or questions?
This is hitting home. Yeah, this is a pretty poignant topic for me right now.
Okay. Great. You want to say anything more, or that's fine too? You know, I hear
Mm,
you.
not at the moment. No, just wanted to say that though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So, is this making sense? Is everybody following it pretty well? Okay, so we will continue. Um, some lectures, you know, I always find there's a lot to say already at the beginning, and other times it takes a while to really, you know, connect into the whole thread of the lecture, and for us to open up into it a little more. So he says, this leads to a very common and frequent fluctuation of experiences. People in this stage are convinced that their strong longing indicates that they are ready for real mutuality. After all, they experience it so beautifully in their fantasies. That they still do not experience it in reality is attributed to their lack of luck in meeting the proper partner with whom they could realize these fantasies. When a partner finally appears, the old fear is still rampant. The soul movements contract, and the fantasy cannot be realized. You know, and I remember, like, when I first started the Pathwork, like, I mean, this was how I was with almost every human contact. You know, my litter mates in my, you know, TP group in the very beginning, right? You know, it's like I would, you know, hardly be able to be present there, and I would also, you know, have a longing for that connection, but, you know, just reaching out for it, and then maybe it wouldn't happen quite the way I wanted, and I would, my critic, my idealized self-image would, turn against me, and it would make me, feel less than or inadequate or self-conscious in some way. So that would get in the way of me being spontaneously who I am and moving into this expansion, which is where then we are able to deeply connect with each other. It's like, and that's what we're longing for, right? But we have to do the work, some inner work here. So he says, the partner actually may have too many obstructions to help them realize the dream. So it could be that, Yet, does this very fact not indicate that some deeper force must be at work in the person's psyche that makes sure to attract the partner with whom the contraction appears justified, right? So the guide is saying in this way, we kind of magnetize our experiences to us and the people and the events and that kind of thing through our inner images and beliefs at some level, and also through our attempting to, defend and protect ourselves, often actually draws to us the thing that we're, trying to avoid. And so, we ourselves, right, are maybe finding partners that are not able to meet us also there. But it's always useful to just look, and see, like, well, are we really capable of that? And oftentimes, it's like we might even be capable, but not with that partner, right? There's too much water under the bridge, or there's too many ways that the connection isn't being made. That mutuality doesn't seem to be available. And so, in a way, it's just to explore, well, is there any part of me that could, make a different, have this inner yes current going out toward that person? And when, we can't, we need to just take responsibility for that, right? It's not a judgment, but we can be more patient, and maybe it's a different person, or maybe it's a healing within us that needs to happen, that can allow our yes current to return in some way. But it's like it's a process. And so for the deeper self always knows where a person stands. If the willingness is still lacking to face the deeper issues in truth, subterfuges and excuses can be necessary for the preservation of the ego, right? We don't want to be aware that, we're not yet ready for that. But failure in the relationship always indicates that the self is not yet ready to put the true mutuality into practice. Many people continue to go alternately through periods of aloneness and acute longing, then temporary fulfillment of a sort in which either outer or inner obstructions prevent full mutuality. The consequent disappointments may lend even more justification to unconscious fears, which feed the resolve not to open up. So we get hurt, and that's a part of why, we're closed down and don't have any inclination at all to, open up. So we need to be carried by the stream of life ultimately. I mean, that's the whole goal. I was doing my YouTube blog today, and I was kind of like sharing about that, like this stream of life, and how, we don't really want to push the river, and somehow we need to learn how to relax into it and trust it. But until then, we have to just be present to what else is there, because that's where we are, and that's what's here. And that's a part of that stream. It's all, what we're just learning now to open and be present to. So the pain and confusion can be very profound in people trapped at this stage. But this pain and confusion will eventually lead to more self-work and the full commitment to find the inner source of the fluctuation. The meaning of this stage is rarely understood. The pain and confusion are there because the fluctuation's true significance is not recognized. When a growing person comes to see that periods of aloneness afford him or her some opportunity to open up in comparative safety and to experience, even though vicariously, some manner of fulfillment without taking the necessary risks, he or she has indeed made a substantial step towards self-realization. Concomitantly, when he or she recognizes the true underlying significance of the difficulties encountered during the times of tentative relationship, the same holds true. The alternating periods of aloneness and relating have their own built-in safety valves. Each preserves the self in its separate state and simultaneously helps it venture out to the extent the entity has become ready to come out of separation. At one point on the road of individual evolution, however, everyone comes to recognize fully how painful this fluctuation is, which subsequently leads to a commitment to be open to mutuality and fulfillment, to interplay and expansion, to cooperation and positive pleasure. This always requires relinquishing the negative pleasure of the pseudo-safety. The soul then becomes ready to learn, to experiment, risk mutuality, love, pleasure, and to function safely in an open state. And then that leads us to the third stage, where people are capable of sustaining mutuality in actuality, not in fantasy, not in longing only. Needless to say that all steady relationships on this earth do not indicate real mutuality. In fact, very, very few do. Most relationships are formed on other assumptions, or else the motivation of mutuality was originally there but given up when it could not be maintained and replaced by other ties. And these are not necessarily bad things, right? It's like the guide says all relationship is good, and it's part of where we're learning. And also, the lack of relationship is also a cauldron in many ways and necessary. So it's never about the judgment, right? But just to kind of realize that, it's like it takes a lot, this huge risk and willingness to be seen, to be heard, to be not seen, if the other person is not coming at you equally, right? And yet it's still, what the guide is saying is important, to risk that, to open more to that. What prohibits mutuality between human beings? Just was trying to see if I skipped something here. I can't remember. Now let us come to the third and perhaps most important part of this lecture. What are the obstacles prohibiting mutuality between two human beings? Usually this is explained and quite accurately in part by people's problems. Yet this does not really say enough. Mutuality can exist only to the degree that individuals know about and are in contact with their shadow, their previously hidden destructive sides. Conversely, if there is a rift between the conscious striving for goodness, love, and decency, and the unconscious that is bent on destructiveness, mutuality cannot take place. And you see this, in maybe some elements of passive aggression in relationships, right? And it can be mild, it doesn't have to be the end of the relationship, but we can feel this and we can recognize, that there's, all of these levels of lack of mutuality or resistance to being in that level of intimacy with somebody else. So I emphasize that mutuality is absent not because the negative aspects are still there, but because there is not sufficient awareness of them. So, if we were aware, mutuality could still happen. We don't have to be perfect to be in mutuality. This is an all-important distinction. Usually human beings approach this problem in the opposite way. They believe they must first eradicate the still existing evil, for otherwise they are undeserving of the bliss that comes from mutuality. So this is another layer of our psyche, even that sometimes, like has, an awareness of, our withholding or our refusal, and then, some part of us knows that we don't deserve it somehow, right? And then we withhold, and so it gets all tangled up in our inner psyche. It's like quite a tangled mess in many ways. Um, but there's, lots of really beautiful tools now, and also just, the clarity of lectures like this that kind of help us see what is in the unconscious and know what to look for. What I call these are maps, right, of the inner psyche, and the lectures are these maps. And then, maps are very useful, but you have to really go into the territory and apply them. So, in the sessions that we do and the group process work that we do, then we're, taking these maps and trying to, use them effectively within our own inner territory. Um, the inner What we fear as the inner evil seems too frightening to be acknowledged, and therefore the rift between the conscious awareness of the self and the unconscious denial of the self widens as life goes on. So when we have these splits, this is one way of speaking of it, but often it's kind of like this deep longing for connection, and then it doesn't happen for various reasons, like that we're not quite ready for it, or don't know exactly how to work with it in our particular trauma, and so we were struggling with it, and then we want to like be able to just really have compassion and acceptance and understanding, because the other side of relationship between people is the relationship with ourself, and where we're in that self-judgment, then the denial of the self widens, right? And that just makes it more complex and more hard to unravel and open to this potential for the longing and the deep love that we want, and connection, even in community and collaboration, and our pathwork, it's like we're still working on this part, right? It's not an easy thing, this thing called mutuality. So if you are alienated from your own unconscious, you must act out what deep in yourself exists within you. So see if that resonates. I mean, for some of us that, are more conscious a little of sort of these aspects that sort of seem to trigger and act out through us or whatever, it's like it's saying, that this is where we actually it helps us. And I struggle with it. I don't like to get triggered or acted out, but in another way I can be grateful for it, and I can see very clearly that sort of that overrides some of the humiliation or whatever, when that comes out, that and in some ways, to just be open and real in the world. The guide says that that's the greatest gift that we can give to each other, because there's so much mask and so much pretense and so much faking it, and we're all just in this game, and there is no real connection, and that's what we're suffering from. So this is with our closest others, or our main significant person, but also in all other relationships as well. So you acted out with another person and affect the unconscious and concealed level of that other person. And in some ways, that's what I sometimes feel too, is like, when I'm getting triggered and I'm acting out, it's like I know inside, even if they're trying to hold it all together, that they're getting triggered as well. And I hope that it's useful for them, right? I kind of like, I don't want them to miss the gift either, right? So I don't feel like, oh, I'm the big problem, and if I was different, everything would be wonderful. Because I think it is a mutuality when we go into conflict with each other, when we don't connect. And there is an equal mutuality of the shadows that are clashing. And it's very useful, to again not judge it, but get curious and make it your study, learn what's happening. So unless this key is applied, relationships must falter or become stale, which often happens, right? A lot of times we just withdraw out of the relationship because nobody seems to be really communicating anything new. It's like, and the guide says that the eros comes from a revealing of the depth of the soul to each other, and he says it should never go stale, because he says the soul is so deep and so wide that there should never be a lack of new material. We can always bring ourselves forward and reveal new layers of our being. And the beauty of a relationship is in that, having a partner who wants to bring that out of you, and you want to bring it out of them, right? And so that's when eros really is working beautifully, is that you are each bringing out the highest in each other, and inspiring each other into that, actually. So unless this key is applied, relationships must falter or become stale, and mutuality in the true sense cannot unfold. Therefore, it is crucial for you to gain increasing contact with the unconscious, destructive aspects of your being. How very difficult it seems for people to bridge the gap between the conscious good and the unconscious evil. Now, he uses this word evil in some specific ways, so I don't know if that affects anybody, but feel free to bring it up as well. We in the pathwork, we work a lot with the shadow, with the lower self, and then there's also levels of that, which you could call evil, but in some ways just the inner no to life in one way or another, right? Is considered like a countercurrent, and therefore, it's sort of, even you can spell it out that way. Evil is the opposite of live, if you turn it around. So I think that's a part of how he's saying that. It's also, I think, useful to use that term a little, because I think we're just now waking up a little bit to the level of possession that humanity has been under, by forces that are dark and negative. And I just recently had a stronger realization and healing of that in my own being. So I think we can use that word in truth with much of what we're working with. So how much struggle everyone puts up, and how many people are tempted to leave this pursuit altogether because it seems too painful and difficult to accept the previously unacceptable aspects of themselves. So yeah, when I first was reading, I thought I was talking about the relationship, but he's saying, no, it's about the work, that this pursuit of the path work, of doing this shadow work inside of us. And yet life cannot truly be lived unless this happens. The split between your conscious self and your real self, that includes the unconscious aspects, must reappear as a split between you and others, unless you are fully conscious of the former. So basically, he's saying we're projecting a lot of our own shadow out onto other people. And it could be, a shadow of our trauma or fear, or it could be a shadow of our own unconscious negative impulses, right? But a lot of times, because we know it's in us, we also are defending and fearing it from outside of us, right? And it's also harder to, where we have been traumatized and affected, it's harder for us to have discernment and to read what, in fact, is happening. And then, when we have a little defense in us, usually people feel that, and then they respond with a little defense. And when we're responding from our defenses, we don't always know, like we feel the defense, and so we feel something is off. And then that's where we can project then, because we can assume that it must be because of this, because that's part of our story. So yeah, so he's talking here about, how we can project. So becoming conscious of your real self is to begin mending this rift. Consciousness diminishes the rift. Consciousness must eventually lead to accepting of what has previously been denied. If there is no mutuality between you and all aspects of yourself, because your standards, your demands, and your expectations of yourself are unrealistic, it is obviously unthinkable that mutuality between you and others can even exist. So this is part of, where I find the work has to begin usually. And, we have varying degrees of it, but most of us still carry, splits within our relationship to ourself. And so we have a every other Sunday evening group session where we just do a little practice of working with, being present and focusing within ourselves and being with whatever is there. So oftentimes, we have this biggest difficulty because of our own demands and expectations of ourselves. And I know for myself, like I spent, the first 5 years in the transformation program and then another 15 after that, really, and still stuck with I had a very strong, inner critic, and really big expectations and demands that I could not possibly meet because of ADHD and some other things. So, like I got all tangled up, and then, it was like that was what I spent most of the time unraveling. And when I finally shifted it, and I believe that people can do that quicker than I did now, in general, and also I think, each person that heals parts of themselves, right, is doing it in the collective. And so it helps all of us to, see it more clearly. And then because I know it so intimately and I know it so clearly, I'm, somebody that can work with people in that way and help them discover it and recognize it and transform it as well. So, we really can shift this way of experiencing ourselves. And when we do that and befriend ourselves, become what I call the soul whisperer for our own journey. And, from that place of the soul whisperer where we can be compassionate and curious and, open to whatever is arising in us, right? And that can help us get more conscious and bring all of this into the light. So comments, questions, how are you doing?
Yeah, I have a question. I think what you're talking about in terms of relating to myself is like transforming the hard pain of perfectionism, uh, uh, giving yourself a break, so to speak. So I would be curious to hear a little bit more about your personal transformation on that. What you were just talking about, when you got to the point where pretty much gave yourself a break.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it was a long time before I was able to do that. And in some ways, the guide talks about this, and he says that what happens is our identification begins to shift out of, the top dog, underdog, like dynamic, right? And we begin to realize that, who we really are is the one that has given their best, worked very long and hard, done the TP program, done, like, and have, really chosen a path to evolve. And so that if we can realize, that that's our nature, our essence, right? So we start beginning to connect more and more deeply with the true self, the real self, right? And that doesn't include our faults, or that we're perfect in any way, but there's a kind of humility and acceptance of the imperfections that is when we're in that critic and that pride place, it really is, like pride and shame, that split. And when we heal that, what happens is that we become aware that, we're in essence divine light, spirit, connected to God, child of God. And we have feet of clay and we're human, but that's not the problem. And that we can, really, looking whenever I go into the depths of my struggles and pain, and this is one of the things that the focusing I think helps, is that I find a place deep inside of me where I see that wrong thing or that thing I'm judging that I did, and I see it from the actual, place of it where it was in that moment and why it chose that. So when I can see the self-judgment, from the place, for instance, of my own fear, right? And then I can see that fear as connected to, my isolated child, my scapegoated child, right? Then I can open the heart again to the truth, in a sense. It's like the truth is revealed. And so I have a counter argument, to the critic, right? And I also am there, in a sense, protecting the critic from, or protecting the child from the critic. So does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
Where when you think of, your inner critic and your relationship with yourself right now, like, have you noticed it change at all? Is it kind of basically still, because it's one of the things that I felt like we didn't teach as well in the program, because I don't think we understood how to do it. And so it does feel like it's a good thing to do, now, even if you've done a lot of path work, if that's still something there.
Yeah, no, I still struggle with the hard pain of perfectionism. I have I'm hard on myself. And when I'm really messed up, I project that onto other people. It's like I want other people to be perfect. The people in around closest people around me in my life. My partner, I want my partner to be more perfect. And that's just a bad expectation. So I fluctuate in the relationship. I fluctuate between being open to mutuality and what I would call self-preservation. Because when the mutuality becomes too difficult, I withdraw in a state of self-preservation. Uh, so yeah, I'm probably a pretty difficult guy to be in relationship with, you know? And I
I
say
think,
that all the time. I say I don't do relationship well, you know? It's kind of my scapegoat phrase for the whole painful process is like I just throw my hands in the air and say I just don't do relationship well. I'm better off in my own quiet little world.
yeah, yeah. So the withdrawal solution, right? That
Yeah.
that is the attempt at serenity, right?
Yeah.
So a part of you goes there because that's your need for serenity, for peace, and
Right.
there's something in, relationship, usually for us all, where we've had trauma, and I think we're coming to the lecture eventually in this book on the compulsion to recreate and overcome childhood hurts, which I think has a big piece in this. But we don't realize really how terrified inside we are and how much in that terror we just want to control.
Mm. Yeah, it's the nothing less than perfect is good enough program that keeps,
Right.
spinning, you
So
know.
good. And so I don't know if you want to, join us Sunday, Frank. I can send it to you. It's when we're doing this focusing place. But that's one of the things that I have discovered is that it's really powerful for any and all parts of us to simply be acknowledged and really basically integrated. And so there's a little process that I've found that helps that a lot, where, even with our inner critic that we tend to want to, like we're either merged with, and we're, beating on ourselves or beating on somebody else, or we're feeling the effect of and we're resisting and trying to wish it would just go away,
Mhm.
right? And so we're either in these two places where we're merged or we're resistant. And so there's this way in which,
Well, I can also be in a place where I'm seeing it, but not able to change it.
right, right. And this is a key to helping that, because what this process says is that what allows things to change naturally is this inner acknowledgement. And so it gives us a little process for just, like I notice something in me wants my attention, like my critic is active, right?
Right.
And so then we go and simply listen deeply. So this is the other part of the work that I call the deep listening, soul whispering, natural communion. So we talked earlier about the soul whispering, but there's this deep listening part where we want to, bring that soul whisper aspect of ourselves into listen deeply to all of the other parts, even the painful parts, the inner critic parts, the judgy parts, the lower self parts, right? So as we connect with them, and basically it's not so much in a mental thing, or we're not into the story, but we're just feeling it in the moment now as
Mhm.
it's experienced, and when that can be understood and acknowledged and integrated, then the body just naturally shifts. It's really interesting. You'll watch people take a deep breath and something in their whole system shifts. And sometimes they're incremental changes, and you probably will have to integrate or connect with your critic this way more than one time. But there's something when we do that in the moment that actually helps us shift it in the moment, even if it does come back. And it's a great aid in working.
Send me the email. Yeah. Thank you. The invitation. Yeah.
Yeah, and if anybody else, I think various people are already on that list, but if anybody else wants to just send me an email. So, okay, so let's see if we can go back to see if I can remember how to do this. Okay. Um, so I'm not sure where let's see. Yeah, so we were talking about the projection that happens. And then he says mutuality between you and yourself is absent when you reject the evil within you. Rejecting evil, you ignore and deny the vital original creative energy that is contained in all evil. So even the inner critic, I mean, we don't always classify that as evil, although sometimes I think that that's that's the main. To me, in some ways, that's the Luciferic consciousness, right? That is trying to control us, and so we want to harness that energy. We don't want to get rid of it. We don't want to separate from it. We want to transform that energy so that it can become available for us again to become whole. And so that's when we talk about this integration process, right? The energy can only be transformed when you are aware of its distorted form. Yet when you reject its present manifestation, how can you reconvert it? So again, we have to find a way to say yes and allow and be with what is, right? Instead of going immediately into war with whatever is and trying to change it, or so there's this very receptive kind of movement that just has to surrender and accept and be with. And then out of that, you may decide that you want to do something, with it, try something, or but it's coming from a deeper presencing, and so then you're following a deeper guidance usually, of how to move with it, to help it regain the flow, to help it relax out of its torment and whatever way it's caught in that. So, and when the split isn't conscious, it mirrors itself in our relationships or in the lack of them. So no matter how evil and unacceptable any specific trait in you may be, no matter how undesirable and destructive, the energy and substance it consists of is a vital force without which you cannot fully function. Only as a whole person can you sustain pleasure. Only as a fully conscious person can you be whole. Only then can you not block the expansive movement and let yourself flow out into the universe of another entity, while remaining open to receive the other's outflowing energy currents and soul movements. Keys for your inner work. Your disunity with yourself cannot bring unity with others. It is folly to expect it. However, you do not have to wait to become totally unified first. If you take your ongoing relationships and use them as yardsticks by which you gauge where your own inner split is, and where you stand in your willingness to accept the negative in you, you will grow into greater self-acceptance. Simultaneously, your ability to have mutuality will grow in proportion to your self-acceptance. Hence, your relationships will improve and become more deeply meaningful. The acceptance of whatever in you have rejected because you refuse to become conscious of it will immediately produce a greater acceptance and understanding of other people you have to deal with. Mutuality will then become possible. By the same token, if you cannot accept the evil in you, thinking in effect, I must first be perfect before I can accept, love, trust, esteem myself, you must express an identical attitude toward the other person. So this is what we've been saying. When the reality dawns on you that he or she is far from perfect, you reject the other person just as you keep rejecting your own self. The difference is that you manage most of the time not to know what you are doing with yourself. This is unfortunate. You manage not to see the rejection of your own imperfect self and that of the other for what it is. You explain it away. This causes a rift in you that makes mutuality and bliss impossible. All of you can use what I say here as a very practical and immediate key in your inner work. You can look at your relationships with your family, your partners, your associates, your friends, your business acquaintances. Look closely at any life situation where you are involved with others. If anything troubles you about them, to what degree are you truly open to the reality of the other person? If you honestly answer this question and you can see that you are not open, you can then use this as a key for yourself. Of course, you can easily shirk seeing it by busying yourself with your explanations, justifications, rationalizations, and even your acute self-blame, which may easily be confused with self-acceptance, but it is just as far removed from it as overt self-denial. On the deeper emotional levels, you will see that in many instances, the willingness to accept others as they are is very small. As you slowly discover your intolerance, your criticalness, you can automatically know that you do exactly the same with yourself. If you are in shallow and satisfactory relationships which lack depth, gratification, and intimacy, where you reveal yourself only superficially, perhaps only showing your idealized self-image, which you think is the only acceptable part of you, again, you will have a good gauge of where you are within yourself. You are not even taking a chance because you are unable to accept yourself. Hence, you cannot believe that your true, genuine self can ever be accepted, nor can you accept others for where they are in their present state of development. All this excludes mutuality. The movement of opening up and taking in, the relaxed bliss of streaming into another energy field and accepting the emanation of the other energy field. This bliss is unbearable and appears dangerous. You hate yourself. When you contract after every temporary opening, you can realize that this does not happen because you are evil and do not deserve the bliss, but because you cannot accept the totality of forces and energies as they exist in you now. Therefore, you remain locked in the contractions and cannot convert them into expansions. So, and that's, I think, where also it just helps to go and sit in the totality of those forces and energies, inside of us. And that helps us, connect with ourself in a deeper way and understand us because when we really go in there, open to learning and understanding, then, we see the beauty that we are. We see, underneath everything, you know, all we do want is really to serve, to love, to have people, everybody is happy, ourselves and others too. We want that mutuality. We don't want to just be happy by our own selves, you know. And yet, this natural, you know, higher self mutuality and giving is blocked by all of our inner conflicts and difficulties with ourselves. So let me say to you, my friends, from the vantage point of a higher degree of consciousness, that all separateness that appears so real in your reality is as much an illusion as the separateness between you and yourself. It is an artifact that comes into being exclusively because of what is denied. By closing your eyes and your consciousness to the total person you happen to be at this stage, you create apparently two selves, the acceptable and the unacceptable. But in reality, there are no two entities. They are both you, whether or not you choose to know this now. But are you really two people? Of course not. The same illusion prevails about all apparently separate entities. Here too, the separation is an arbitrary, artificial construct of the mind. In reality, such a division does not exist. This may not be easy for you to feel at this stage, but the fact remains that human beings live in the overall illusion of separateness, which is the cause of pain and struggle. In reality, all is one, and every entity is connected with everything else in the universe. And this is not merely a figure of speech. One consciousness permeates the universe and everything therein. But you can begin to experience this unity only when there is no longer any part of yourself that is excluded, denied, or split off. So are there any questions respect to this topic? So he sometimes has this section of question and answers at the end of the lecture. Let me pause here. Any comments or questions on before we go into the Q&A? Okay, we'll just continue reading. Energy flow and mutuality. Question. Can you discuss the aspects of mutuality on the physical, mental, and spiritual levels from the energetic point of view? Answer, yes. From the energetic point of view, the expanding movement is an outgoing and outflowing movement. When two separate human beings open up toward one another in mutuality, able to accept an open flow without contracting, the energy from one interpenetrates the energy field of the other, and vice versa. It is a constant interflow and exchange. It is otherwise with the people who remain separate, who contract and cannot open up to mutuality. Two such people remain enclosed, like an island, with little or no energy being exchanged between them. And when exchange of energy is blocked, the great evolutionary plan is delayed. When a person can open only when there is no chance of mutuality, or when a yes current must be met with a no current because mutuality seems too frightening, one energy flow streams out, but reverberates and bounces back, thrown back by the closed energy field of the other. The latter is like a wall that throws off any incoming flow. Thus, the two flows can never become one flow. This phenomenon can easily be observed in everyday life. People either always fall in love when it is not reciprocated, or for apparently unfathomable reasons fall out of love when their partner has deep feelings. The same principle exists in ongoing relationships. When one person is open, the other is closed, and vice versa. Only steady development and growth changes this so that both learn to remain open to one another. On the spiritual and emotional levels, the lowest stage indicates an acute state of fear. The fear of accepting the self in its present stage is essentially the same fear that wants to run away from true mutuality and bliss. Since the fear is there, hate must also come into being with all its derivatives, right? So, and people may recognize some of that, like when, and then the mental levels are affected by this process. Like when we don't open to love, like there's a place of that wants to hate, and that wants to strike out. Part of it is in our own pain, right? The mental levels are affected by this process of avoidance when a person seeks ready explanations for what cannot be understood unless the self is accepted for what it is now. The mental activity becomes so busy that it cannot attune to the higher voices within the self. So we're constantly trying to figure it out in our mind, right, and fix things and judge or, rationalize or whatever. And all of that blocks the access to the higher voices within the self or the deeper truths of the universe. Get a sip of coffee here. More separation is thus engendered. Mental noise creates more disconnection from the feelings. And this is why it's so important when we do our work that we're mostly in the body, mostly in the energy, mostly in the feeling state, and in the here and now present. Because the mind is going into the past or into the future. Now, if you're grounded in that here and now present, and then some recollection of memory of the past or some, thing jumps in, then it's probably relevant, and should be explored. But if you're just up in your mind, ruminating about stuff, then it's most likely just that and not so useful. So to come back into the body, into the present, into, this moment, lose our mind, come to our senses. And such a person or an entity then is forced to live in this, when we're not able to be in our full embodied self, but we're just in the mind. It creates a state of frustration and unfulfillment. The mind can't make us fulfilled. We need the body for that. We need the physical and the sensual and the, experiential. And the mind is, it just has theories and ideas. It doesn't have much, I guess, juice in some way, right? Sometimes an inspired thought, can give us that, but I think it's coming in because of the inspiration is coming on some other important, aspect of that thought. So in the second stage, where alternate opening up and contracting occurs, the mental activity of the person is confused. Search and groping cannot yield truthful answers as long as the self is not accepted with its very worst. Mental confusion creates more frustration and anger. It's like it's really easy for the mind to catch into, like what we feel like is happening, from the other side of things. And there's probably even some truth to it, but there's a way in which it doesn't ever resolve, right? And just kind of being in the state of that frustration and blame also is not, useful in the long run, right? It's another block that we're trying to move through. So the faulty interpretations, which are supposed to explain why the person is always missing mutuality, only increases frustration, right? The reasons, right? And therefore anger and hate. On the emotional level, longing and disappointment alternate with fulfillment and fantasy. This indicates some degree of opening and flow, although with no real mutuality, but withdrawal and contraction. The later again includes hate and anger, disappointment, and blaming. When self acceptance makes mutuality possible and energy is exchanged, the universal movements flow evenly. The healthy alternation of the expanding, contracting, and static principles prevails, where individuals find themselves in the eternal rhythm, harmonious with the universe. So be blessed, my dearest ones. May this lecture again be a little light shining inside yourself, giving you hope and strength, showing you from yet another side the way, and leading you more strongly toward accepting yourself exactly as you are now. May you not indulge in anything nor excuse it, but see it for what it is, accept the imperfection, neither embellishing it nor exaggerating it so that you cringe with shame and fear. All these distortions must disappear, for they are pitfalls, more disastrous than whatever aspects you hate yourself for. When you find and apply this attitude, you will find your happiness and the truth that unites you with yourself and with the universe. Okay, I'm going to stop the share. So, any final comments, questions, discussion?
I like this lecture.
Yeah.
It's a really good reminder again, and I like the perspective. I like your personal perspective on it as well. I really appreciated that you sharing. I think, yeah, I think the more we uncover, the more there is to heal, and and I guess I see why some people don't even get on that. It's strange to them, but that's the way to actually, that's the way to unconditional love. There's no other way. Accept yourself fully so that you can fully accept others and show unconditional love. Yeah.
And so, it's also good to know, like, okay, so if you are drawn to a path, that would develop that is in essence, who you are. It's your value. It's what's important to you. You have chosen at some level of your soul, you know, and want this development into unconditional love. And not all souls are there yet, right? Not all souls would, feel that call or feel that desire to achieve that, or to, just be more loving in general, much less universal perfect love. But it's like it is that path, and to know that you would like that, you want to open to that level of mutuality with the world, with everybody in the world, then that's something to be really treasure in yourself, to know about yourself, that is your essence, that is your nature, that is, whether you succeed fully or not, part of what you came here to try to do, and to appreciate that in who you are.
It definitely allows to feel deeper, to connect deeper with the people. Yeah. And it's, I mean, it will take lifelong to heal, and there's never like a stop point. That's it, I'm over, I'm done. Right? There's something to feel. Always something comes up.
Yeah.
And
And that's part of, like that's a lot of people come to therapy or the path, kind of, it's like the ego understanding, the mind's understanding that, oh yes, I have a problem, I need to just fix it, right, and then I'll be fine. And that's a very different understanding than what the guide in the pathwork is saying. No, it's like you're here on a lifelong spiritual path. This is part of the reason why you came here. It's probably the main reason why you came here. um and so, the more consciously you can take it on, the more happy you will be. Now, people that are not ready to do that, it's not necessarily the right thing for them, right? And they probably wouldn't be more happy taking it on. They have to wait until they're motivated from inside, and feel that same inner longing.
I'm just thinking of my mom, who has actually started showing some interest in that path.
Mm,
It's just interesting to
uh-huh.
getting on it, and yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's like and many things. I mean, I feel like the whole, compared to when I started doing this work back in 1984, and I was doing work even before then. But yeah, it's like a lot of awareness has increased in the universe about all, or in the world about all of these things, and so people seem in general much more conscious, or there's just more people that are more conscious, and there's still those that are totally not, but a lot more are. So that feels to me like, the guy basically said, when he started channeling these lectures, that he came in to prepare us for something coming, right? A transition in human development. And I think that this is actually, part of what's happening in our, world right now, is that time that we were working and being prepared, and doing the, that he sent this in was to help us, and to, maybe develop ourselves beyond what we're facing now. But I think really it's also like it can help us a lot. And I guess in my own journey too, I was aware, like, how, I had been sort of carrying a lot of fear and negativity in my being, around the politics and the world situation. And I saw much more clearly, how, this path is also designed to help us, uh, somehow, work with that so that we're not infected by it. And it's kind of important for those of us that have that capacity to try to, get to that place, and we get it and lose it and get it again. But again, one of the things that I am so aware of is whenever I get into my triggers and my sort of negative defenses, that I can feel literally the life force in me bleeding out. And at my age, I don't have that much left. I want to protect as much of it as I can. And so it got my attention, okay, I don't want to, I need to see if I can find a way. And then it was a different study, because it's like, what I was doing was just getting triggered by stuff and didn't know how to not do that. But some of the help that I got made me realize that actually I'm carrying that negativity before I get triggered, and that I need to get conscious a little prior to the actual event that causes me to go unconscious. Um, I'm already to some degree unconscious. I'm already pissed off or negative in some sense. I may not be, blasting it out into the world, but so just that has helped me already. And I'm listening more in that deep listening way, monitoring even the subtle ways that I might get into a little more negative mood or space inside of myself. And it's going to happen, anyway, so it's fine if it does. But it's helped me catch myself several times, which I've never been able to do before. So I'm very pleased about that. So it continues, and again, so much of it is help, because what I would used to do is I would not catch myself, and then I would judge myself, and I would be mad at myself, and all of that would just keep me spinning in the negative places, right? And so I like the message of this lecture a lot. I had forgotten how much it was really talking about our self-relationship, but that really is the key for me in all of this. And so, yeah, I will definitely send you that link, Frank. And
Thank
I
you.
don't know, Skylar, I think I'm sending it to you. You know, you're welcome to come too.
Yeah, I think I stopped getting the emails, but I will actually email you separately. Maybe we could arrange one-on-one
Okay.
on that.
Sunday evening at that time doesn't work for you as well, then maybe. It's pretty early for you, probably.
What time do you guys
It's
gather?
like a 6 to 8 time on alternate Sundays.
6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
My time, yeah. So that would be like what 3 p.m. to 6 or something like your time.
Okay. Yeah, I will also email you separately.
Okay. Yeah.
We'll arrange something.
I was, sorry. I was also gonna say, like, I'm glad, like, I was happy when the lecture started saying ultimately it's mutuality with yourself. Because like it is, like, there's just gotta be a point where I can't, my peace of mind can't be dependent. And yet there's, the thing is what I'm also noticing on top of that is what this work that we're doing, it's changing, hopefully, I think, I know it is, but it's changing our relationship with ourselves. And in changing our relationships with ourselves, I notice that that can cause more pain with people that we're interacting in relationship with. I could see it because in doing this work, I'm looking for the image that it keeps giving me that I was accepting before, that I didn't realize was an image. And I feel like that's something that when we're in a relationship with other people, with a partner or something, or people that we work with, I'm going to respond different because I'm not that person anymore. And so that can cause problems too. So I feel like not getting caught in that hard pain is difficult when there's a, when it's an image. So I like what you said, like just catching it before you get merged in the image is all I
Yeah.
feel. That's all I feel like I can do.
Right.
And then hopefully mutuality is me integrating, or not just me, but people integrating their fear of what they don't want to be with what they really are, that they don't even know they are, which is,
Yeah, and again, somebody's not consciously doing it, they're still working it, but yeah, when you're consciously doing it, I think the other piece is, to not respond maybe from the negativity, but then the negativity, is activated to some degree, you're conscious of it, right? Especially if you're catching it before you get triggered. And so there's this consciousness that can then in that moment, take it in and work it with the relationship focusing part, right? Where you can really see, I notice that there's this part of me that right now is getting, affected by something. And we go in and, really acknowledge it and try to understand and seek to see more deeply into what is affecting it. And again, a lot of times that can, take us into the childhood traumas and wounds, because, you can sort of see the dynamic that's being activated. And so, it's like by just, holding that in ourselves as well. Uh, and that does that integration that he was talking about, like really embracing even our critic, even our self-critic. It's like we're now identifying that as the primary issue, is our negative relationship with ourselves. But then if we say, well, that's the problem, we have to get rid of it, it's not integrating it, right? So we have to just keep embracing everything in some deeper way. And yes, we can not act it out, we can seek to, be a containment for it and guide it that way. So.
Right. And I also wanted to say, like, I'm amazed sometimes how in this work that we're doing, like, I'm just amazed at how when, like, and I know it's some sort of traumatic response. It's amazing how when you're when you're relating to somebody and how subtle and how unconscious something happens, that how the thoughts are so attacking, whether it's, how the thoughts say, I need to get out of here. I need to get away from you. It's like, I, I don't need to get away from you. I need to stop thinking that I need to get away from you. Because I don't want a reflection of who I think I am when I'm next to you. It's like, I think I'll be happier without you, but that's what it is saying, once you're gone, I have no reflection. But I'd rather be able to say, and that's something is like, oh, I want to get to the point where I'm so porous in my response to you that your reflection goes right through me, that I don't see it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when
tiny bites.
But I think, like there's this way that we see, these parts, and again, it's easy for us then to, like go to the control aspect, right? Which is not always possible. And then when we don't control it, then we judge and blame ourselves or blame them for, triggering us again or whatever. And so there's this, I think, other movement that helps me in that, which is, like staying more present in advance of that, basically the way it was spoken to me that made a lot of sense is like there's a connection, and this is a kind of mutuality, you would say, that we have with our divine source. And like when we're connected to that divine source, we feel the light, we feel uplifted, we feel positive in general. And then what I'll notice is some little thing will frustrate me or trigger, piss me off or something, some little aggravation, something to complain about. And I will follow my energy that has some juice around being pissy about things, right? It's like, and so then I'll follow that, and then I'll kind of begin to go downhill, and I won't even recognize that I'm
Follow
in
those
a
thoughts down.
grousey, negative dynamic already. And then something will happen from outside that will go kaboom and light the spark, and everything will go flying in every direction. And so at that point, I can't stop it, but I'm beginning to see how I might be able to catch it a little earlier if I stay remembering to make that link with the divine in a way that feels real. And that's a part of the work that we're doing. How do we feel worthy? How do we feel that energetic connection with the life force, with the uplift of spirit, with the higher vibrations of gratitude and fulfillment and blessing, right? So
yeah, it's a further reach to the divine when you're down and at that lower level than when it's a little bit hard to reach.
It is, yeah. And so it's kind of like where you want to catch yourself before you fall too far.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Great.
Thank you, Darlene.
Thank you.
Good night,
We
everyone.
will
Thank you.
see everybody hopefully close to Sunday or somewhere along there. Okay, take care.
Okay.